Hello, everybody, and welcome to the SoxProspects.com podcast, the web's #1 source for information on the Boston Red Sox from top to bottom, from Fort Myers to Worcester, across the Pike to Fenway, and all stops in between. Thank you all for listening. I'm Chris Hatfield. I'm the executive editor of Sox Prospects, joined, of course, by our director of scouting, Ian Kundle. And for this special season in review wrap-up episode, we workshopped it. Trust me, that's the name. We're joined by the dude himself, Sox Prospects editor-in-chief Mike Andrews. Gentlemen, three-man booth tonight. We're ready to roll. I'm liking where we're going here. A lot to talk about in the season that was in 2024.
I think it's been a while since we've had a three-man booth.
It has. I'm trying to think.
There was one this season. I don't remember when, but I feel like we had one earlier in the
Mid-year
season.
rankings?
Might have been, but
yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. So we're glad to have you back, Chris, after a few weeks away. And Mike, always great to have you back on the podcast.
Loving it.
Yeah, been listening, and like I told you last time, I like actually getting the podcast dropped into my feed without knowing it's coming now. So it's quite entertaining. So good work filling in without the regular host on, Ian. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Happy to. We just got to give the people what they want. And what they want is more podcasts. And so that's what we're giving them this year.
Without me. I'm kidding. But at any rate, before we get into the season review, we've got a lot to talk about. I think this has been, I don't know about you guys, one of the better years on the farm in the site's history, with where things wound up, a lot more up than down. I think we're going to have a lot of great stuff to talk about in both directions, but hopefully folks will enjoy it. But let's just get some preliminaries out of the way. Of course, spread the word, tell your friends, tell the third person at dinner with you and your significant other, or, the third friend who kind of hangs out with you and your best friend. And it gets a little weird. I'm not going to say which one of these guys, Ian, it is, but
third wheel.
Yeah, it's, it is what it is. You can, of course, help by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, wherever it is that you listen to the show. As I mentioned a couple weeks ago, Pocket Casts, if you use that, just added rating ability. So rate us on there if that's what you use. And of course, you can support us on patreon.com/SoxProspects and get some sweet perks for your support of the show. We always appreciate everyone who supports us there. And of course, send your emails to podcast@SoxProspects.com. We want to talk about what you all want to hear about, like Ian and the other Chris Clegg did last episode. If you didn't listen to that, make sure you go back and listen to it. Some great stuff on there as well. Gentlemen, before we get too far in, maybe some quick news here, and just as a programming note, we're recording this episode as well as the next episode in succession because we're going to get through the whole season wrap up in one fell swoop. So we may or may not tack on a news section to the second episode. But news today, guys, the Red Sox Arizona Fall League contingent was announced today. For those who didn't see it, it includes the following: catcher Brooks Brannon, who's the only player ranked in the top 60 for the site right now at number 51, who's in this contingent. Outfielder Caden Rose, utility player Max Ferguson. Those are the three hitters. Brandon, of course, was in Salem all year. Rose, I think he had a cameo in Greenville, but most of the year was in Salem. Ferguson spent most of the year in Double-A. And then five pitchers, right-hander Tyler Uberstein, who only had kind of a cameo at the end of the year in Greenville, coming back from Tommy John. Right-handed reliever Cooper Adams, left-handed reliever Zach Fogel. Adams spent the year in Greenville. Fogel split between Salem and Greenville. And then a couple of arms who in swingmen in Danny Kerwin and Connor Steinbaugh. Kerwin was in Salem all year. Steinbaugh was in Greenville for a bit to start and then went down to Salem. The thing that stands out to me is how much of a departure this is from past AFL contingents. I don't know if that's what you guys thought. Mike, I see you nodding vigorously. It seems like you've got some thoughts on this crew. So maybe let's start with you.
I thought it was a departure in two ways, and I think you've already tweeted this or mentioned it on the forum. One, in that it is not as prospect laden as you would expect. Usually you're seeing 7-8 guys go to the AFL, and 4 or 5 of them are top 30 players, and 2 or 3 of them are players that needed to get some extra playing time. And then the second major departure to me is the level of it. Usually you're looking at players that are Double-A level, maybe a couple Triple-A guys, maybe a high A guy that was on the cusp or just finished the season in Portland. This is a lot of low A, high A type players, which is just a big departure. And I think the gut from a lot of the people we're hearing online is that maybe they're not putting as much stock into the AFL as they have in past years, and they want to do stuff in their own lab in Fort Myers, and that's what I'm initially thinking as well. I haven't seen what other teams. I didn't look at the full rosters of other teams yet. I don't know if other teams are having that same departure.
I don't know, Ian, did you look at it at all? I really didn't get a chance to do a full deep dive on the rosters and see if this was unique.
Yeah, no, it's kind of a mixed bag. So like, Baseball America obviously does a great job covering this, and they had an article talking about the top 100 prospects, how many are there, and there's actually more this year than last year. There's 13 of their top 100 are in it. Last year was 11, and which is the most since 2022, which was 14. So there are like some big prospects, but if you look at the names, I do think it is trending younger. Like looking at the top 100 prospects that are there, you have like Colt Emerson, who's still a teenager, Ethan Salas, who's obviously very young, Leo DeVries is 18, Bryce Eldridge was drafted last year and is a high school. Like, so it seems like it's a lot of teams are going younger. I think that might not just be a Red Sox thing. But I think the other thing is they're just sending a bunch of guys who need to make up time for injuries. Like you mentioned Uberstein, excuse me, but like Caden Rose, Max Ferguson, all those guys have been injured. And that's Brandon, the other, that's another trend when you look at a lot of the rosters is it's guys who missed time this year. Like the Mets sent Jet Williams, who's one of their better prospects. Cleveland sent Chase DeLauder, both of them missed significant amount of time this year. So I think that it probably varies from organization to organization, but I think what Mike said is spot on, that the Red Sox, they've obviously had great returns from the internal processes they put into place, more individualized training. And I do wonder if they just think the value of those reps where they're more in a controlled environment is more important than having guys potentially who are tired, especially if they played a full season, who are kind of, because if you look at the top of the system, for the most part of guys who were potential AFL candidates, most of them played a lot of the season. Like the only ones who really didn't would be like Mikey Romero, maybe. But I could understand with Romero, I mean, he still played a lot compared to previous years for him. And so I could understand just wanting him to, work with him in Fort Myers the next couple months and then kind of go into the offseason healthy. So I think it's a departure, but I think it kind of trends with the way the Red Sox are going with their processes, where it might not necessarily be as beneficial to have like more game action than it would be to have them in Fort Myers in the lab, working with all the high tech equipment down there, all the analysts. That's kind of what this front office is very analytical, especially under Craig Breslow. That's the way they're going. And I think that that's more beneficial to them than getting out there and maybe having some tired guys play against questionable competition.
And I think it continues a trend we're seeing across the game, right? Because I think it's something we saw start with the death of the fall instructional league, where teams didn't want to send their guys to play inter-team games. They wanted to just keep them at the complex and work with them at the complex.
Yeah.
And I think that that's expanding because, I mean, when we were talking about the potential, or at least maybe when I was thinking about it, I was thinking, wow, this might be a loaded AFL contingent, right? Because their top prospects are in the top of the system, because it was always guys AA, mostly AA and above. Sometimes you get a high A guy who was almost ready for AA, they would push in. But it seemed like they could be sending an absolutely loaded group that included a Christian Campbell, a Kyle Teal, a Roman Anthony. And it makes more sense now why when Marcelo Meyer got hurt and I asked, was he potentially going to the Arizona Fall League? The response I got was no. And to be honest, we never really thought about it. And that makes so much more sense in context now of like, clearly they're not thinking this is a place we send our top prospects right now. No. Because even if you think, and it's interesting too, like with the age thing, it's usually like the AA-ish catcher, right? Yeah. And like last year it was Hickey. Before that it was a Steven Scott. This year, even if it wasn't going to be Teal, you would think they would send maybe like a Rosario, right? Or even like, I don't know, who was the other primary catcher in Greenville this year? I guess Lira, but he's hurt. So, if it's not going to be, Teal, maybe Rosario, but they go all the way down to Salem for Brannon, who started the year on the 60-day IL. Okay, that makes some sense. Some sense. Rose and Ferguson both spent time on the 60. Uberstein coming back from Tommy John. And then, the other four guys, it's not a knock on them, but they're all 24, 25 years old.
Well, and I think the pitching thing is kind of a continuation. If you look at the rosters, there's not a lot of high-end pitchers. There's not a single top 100 pitching prospect going to the AFL.
And that makes sense.
And I think it's just teams are realizing that they don't want their guys throwing competitive innings like that. all the way into November. Like it for right or for wrong, the way the kid gloves are on with pitching prospects these days, and
Yep.
especially the top ones, and they're not going to have them, risking anything in a
Is
situation that's not entirely in their control.
is DeLauder not in the top 100?
No, he is. I said him earlier.
Oh, but I thought you said no top 100 pitchers. Maybe I misheard you.
Chase DeLauder's an outfielder.
Oh God, who am I thinking of? Dollander. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Dollander. Yeah,
Chase
no.
Dollander.
Yeah, no, he's not
DeLauder's
gone.
the outfielder.
Yeah, because I mean,
right.
the top
Sorry.
100 prospects going there's 4 catchers, 4 shortstops, 3 first basemen, and then a couple outfielders.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So I got to think that there's a rule that requires you to send
there is
7 or 8. So like they sent 3 pitchers that are they're probably basically on extended tryouts, or like they're borderline on the bubble for making roster spots next year. And like Cooper Adams, Connor Steinbaugh, Danny Kerwin. So they're on extended tryouts, and throw them out there and see what they can do against some decent competition, and maybe it'll help them along the way. But that's almost like if we got to send somebody, that's who we're sending.
Well, it's interesting too that if you look at 3 of those guys were minor league free agents before the season or during the season this year. Like
indie league guys.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm like signed as like indie ball or minor league free agency. And Fogel was obviously drafted, and Uberstein was drafted, and he's coming back from an injury. But I think you could be onto something with the domestic reserve list kind of obviously much tighter now. It gives them another look at maybe some guys they brought in during the season and want to see more innings from against, because the hitting side, there are still some decent prospects. As I said, there's 13 top 100 hitters there. So there's going to be some decent guys in the lineup. And so it's a good test for the pitchers, but it's interesting that the guys they sent, as you said, are kind of not. Uberstein is really the only one who would be in consideration for the top 60 who was sent.
It might make sense just for context here, because we keep talking about what they're doing at the complex, to say what they are doing. The fall performance program, which is what replaced the fall instructional league, which was basically like Instructs, but just an internal intra squad program where they invited, what was it, like, was it 40 or 60 guys down?
I think it varied from year to year.
It varied, yeah.
60, I think.
Because then last year they split it into 2 groups that were kind of like the low minors and higher minors guys. No one from AAA, and I think it was very few from AA, but it was like kind of the rookie ballish types, and then the high A-ish types, and folks in between. And that's how they split it up last year. This year they're not doing that, and what they're doing instead, and this is in part something that was put in the minor league CBA that was agreed to, I think, before this season. Am I remembering that right? Basically, there are 2 off-season training periods. There's one that's from the end of the AAA season, so it started on September 23rd, and it runs through, I believe, the Saturday or Sunday prior to Thanksgiving. Then there's a dead period from that point through Thanksgiving, Christmas, and the end of the calendar year. And then there's a winter training period that starts on January the 2nd that runs through spring training. And what teams can do is they invite players to come to that. Now it's a, quote unquote invitation. You don't say no, but players come to the complex by invite only. And at that point they are in camp training. The salary you receive when you're in camp training during one of the training periods is different than what you get during those periods. If you're not in camp training, it's like a $400 a week raise or something like that. I think it's like $290 to $6 something. So guys won't be there the entire off season, but when you talk about the off season training program, when we were in camp this year, they were raving about certain guys and what they did in the off season training program. Yostinson Garcia, Christian Campbell, Yohan Fran Garcia as well, who unfortunately got hurt. But some of these breakouts were guys that put in really good off-season training programs. And so these are very important, even though we're not necessarily going to have eyes on it. But that, again, it's part of the trend of where this is going. They want to get guys down there in their program with their coaches. Some guys might need more hands-on coaching than others, and that's kind of the trend of where it's going. So felt like that context was kind of important to throw on there. I don't know. Either of you guys have any kind of thoughts on this, how this is where they're headed? I think we've kind of hit it, but.
Well, I think that's a good point though. That last part about the work the guys are putting in the off season is so important, because Christian Campbell, who was, Jeff Ponce, when he was on a couple of weeks ago, talked about was going to be the Baseball America Player of the Year, was officially named it. And he went on their Hot Stove show yesterday and talked about how some of the work the Red Sox had him doing and how it was so important for the improvements he made. And it was a lot of stuff he'd never heard of before. There's a really good video clip. I'll try to retweeted. I can't remember where I saw it, but and it kind of goes hand in hand with something that Kyle Boddy, who obviously is one of the Red Sox special advisors, posted, which was their current hitting instructor or hitting director, Jason Ochart, talking about like the elements of hitting that they focus on at driveline. And it's something obviously that he's brought with him to the Red Sox. And these are all things that they can emphasize when you're, as Chris said, when you're, when you're down in Fort Myers and you have all the equipment down there, they have the traject machines, they have all the special pitching apparatuses and hitting machines,
slow motion camera or high speed cameras.
Yeah, exactly. That they can really work on those things, and they can get Christian Campbell doing, his weighted bat routines and the weighted ball routines for the pitchers and things like that.
Yep.
That's stuff that they can really focus on when they're in Fort Myers over these next couple months and start building towards next season. Whereas if they're sending those guys to the AFL, they don't have control of that. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
They have like one coach there. I forget who it is this year, but it's like, you send a coach, a catcher, at least 2 other position players, a starting pitcher, at least 3 other relievers, and then there's like a, kind of wild card spot for your 8.
But I think that is that's a good point, that this is where the for the players, next season starts now, basically. Everything they're doing is with an eye towards building up for next season, and this is where the jumps can start. So it is important work that they're going to be putting in down in Fort Myers, even if it's not going to be something that's really covered.
Well said. Well, while we're maybe finished looking ahead, maybe let's look back at the season that was on the farm. The Red Sox end the year with 6 prospects in Baseball America's season end top 100. One of the stronger, I think, guys, tops of the system we've seen in a while. I don't want to say the system is as good as it was in circa like 2016, 17, but it feels like it's certainly the best it's been since then. I don't know if you guys agree with that piece of it. A lot of really good stuff happened down on the farm. And I don't know if you guys want to do this, but if not, we can always cut it. But maybe just really quick before we hit the positions, we're going to split this between, this episode will be hitters. Next episode, we'll talk pitchers. Is I think the plan. Just your kind of maybe 10,000 foot, really quick, in a couple minutes, thought on when you look back at this season, what are the headlines for you on what it was? Is it a player? Is it a trend? Maybe one thing that comes to mind when you think of the 2024 season on the farm. And I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot on this when you guys did all the prep, but I don't know, Ian, do you have anything that comes to mind kind of when you think of what happened on the farm in 2024 for a headline?
Yeah, I think the most important development is the step forward with potential high-end, like all-star or better level talent. That's something that the Red Sox have lacked over the past 2 years. If you look at them versus you compare it to the teams that have won the World Series and the teams that are in competition for the World Series, Red Sox just haven't had blue chip players, enough of them. It's really hard these days to win the World Series when you don't have those cost controlled blue chip players. And coming into the season, maybe you thought Marcelo Meyer was on that path. You thought Roman Anthony was likely on that path, but that was maybe about it. And with the jump that Christian Campbell has made, and I have more confidence, and I like what I've seen from Kyle Teal, and Luis Perales was on that track before he got hurt. Then you also have potentially, Braden Montgomery. They added a lot of potential high end talent to the system. And I think that that's going to be key, because if you're not going out and, spending a lot of money on big free agents, that's the only way you're going to get that kind of upside into the system, really. So I think that the steps forward that guys like Campbell have taken, Anthony, putting them into the top 25 prospects nationally is the most important development this year.
Mike, what do you think?
My answer is kind of similar. It's just that the position player high end is stacked. The future looks very bright there. Really exciting. When I talk to friends or family members, I'm kind of excited to talk about it, where in the past I've been like, there's not much exciting coming here. But now it's like there's so much that you have to trade somebody to get pitching. And that's going to make for a super interesting offseason. So I'm just jazzed about all of that talent they have in the position player base on the Major League roster and coming up very soon. And how they decide to split that up to try to get some pitching is going to be really, really interesting this offseason.
That's actually a really good point Mike made, because it is not just the farm. The Major League roster had similar, like Jarren Duran,
on
field has turned himself into an all-star. like
Right.
Like if he does what he does this year, he's one of the top outfielders in baseball.
So fun to watch.
And
consistent 5-WAR guy going forward if he keeps doing this, right?
Like that's with
that's
this type of performance. That's a massive jump and not something and not something that's not something you project for a guy in his third or fourth season in the big leagues to make that jump. Like that doesn't happen very often.
And especially one that's had the issues he's had at the major league level where it's not just, oh, he's just missing. Yeah. Right. Like he was changing his stance every freaking week. Like, So
like, but it is, that was a great point by Mike. It's not just the minor league team, it's the major league team. And that's why, like, as Mike said, going forward, this is going to be the massive offseason. It's something we're going to be talking about a ton because this team is positioned where they have so much young talent that now it's about augmenting the team with getting the right veterans in, bringing in the right high price free agents and getting the right pitching. And if they do that, there's a chance that there's, going back to what Chaim Bloom talked about when he was brought in building a sustainable contender, there's a pathway to building a sustainable contender for the next 5 to 10 years. The key is this offseason is kind of the big litmus test to see how are they going to go about that because they have the potential horses. It's now about building, a team around them. And that's the hard part is, it's one thing to bring all the top guys in, but now it's about building a cohesive unit that can work directly, both offensively, defensively, pitching, everything. Bringing it all together is the hardest part.
Yeah, and I think maybe 2 points that come to mind for me. I think you guys hit on the actual headlines, but like one thing that makes how clear how strong the year was for the system, they traded 10 minor leaguers at the trade deadline, and the rankings don't really feel like they took that much of a hit for it. I mean, they did, but
it was pretty funny. I looked at, can you guess if you had to rank the WAR between the 10 minor leaguers they traded, Luis Garcia, Lucas Sims, and Danny Jansen, which player do you think has the highest WAR of anyone?
Ryan Zefferjon.
Yeah, he has a higher WAR than all 3 players they acquired combined.
Yeah.
Somebody on the forum called that on the day it happened. Was like, do we really trust Sims more than we would trust just giving?
Is that the form or was that done?
I don't know.
That might have been.
I was done.
I think
you're right, Chris. I think it was.
It was done.
Props to James.
Yeah,
because I just looked at. I was just flabbergasted when I looked at that because I was. There's obviously been a lot of articles written recently. This past week, I think Jen McCaffrey had a really good one, and I think Stats has talked about on Twitter like that the trade deadline acquisitions have not exactly lived up to expectations. And then I was curious, what has Ryan Zefferjon done? And obviously, he's been great since he went to the Angels and got called up. So
yeah,
that's tough.
The other piece of it I could just jump in though is that both Sims and Garcia got hurt.
They did.
That doesn't help when you're talking about a counting stat like WAR.
No, and it doesn't help either that Nick York has made the majors and Greaser obviously is not going to, even though he's been great in AAA.
But I think that's planned though. Like I don't think that's a disappointment. They got him and they said he's not a consideration for the major league roster. I'm still wondering if they'll give him the 162nd game.
The DeVern hand sack special.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking of as I said it. I could see them doing that. I could see them not. And the main reason I could see them doing that is that Tauk's spot in the rotation, and it seems like they let him get to 30 starts and they might pull the plug. I don't know.
When is that, Sunday?
Yes. Yeah. And I think the second point I was going to make, actually, it's more of a pitching point. Maybe let's table this and we'll talk pitching headlines for the next episode when we talk pitching.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Well, so let's start like these things always do for whatever reason at catcher. I guess so the plan is we're each going to pick Ian a player. A player
that we want to talk about. Can be for good, for bad, for surprise. It's just it's a surprise. Build your own adventure. Yeah. But someone who has caught your eye this season and why they're important. It can be for the future. It can be for trade. Like this is a build your own adventure segment, but just hit on the key players at each. Those position.
Famous build your own adventure books. Yes. So does someone get Teal?
Yeah, someone could take
Teal. Whoever goes first can go.
I'll let someone else take Teal because I think I have someone else I'd like to talk about.
Let Mike go first.
Easy one.
I hope I don't see yours because I wanted to talk about Mickey Gasper.
Nope, go for
it. So Mickey Gasper was a next in line of the many minor league Rule 5 draft picks from the Yankees.
That's right too.
Player that went to Bryant, Merrimack, New Hampshire high school grad, 28 years old, going to turn 29 in 2 weeks, and hadn't really played a little bit in AAA, prior to this, but mostly a double-A player prior to this year. Came in and was one of the best hitters in the entire minor leagues for the first half of the year.
Not just the Red Sox,
right,
the
the entire
minors.
minor leagues.
Yeah.
I think there was parts of the season he was leading the entire minor leagues in OPS. At first, second, bouncing back and forth, sometimes with Christian Campbell, but just like couldn't stop hitting. And then they gave him a chance. And it was a fun story on Nesson. Probably everybody saw it with his parents in the crowd. Struggled in short time. I don't know if he's had 12, 15 at bats or something like that in the majors, and wasn't able to get a hit yet. But fun story. I think that he's worked himself into someone as backup consideration or just an emergency up and down guy that I think will likely make it through the offseason sticking on the 40-man. So that's just kind of fun.
Or at least potentially, right? Like, which is saying something.
Well, that's, yeah.
Even though you're talking about it is nice.
It's an interesting situation when it comes to catcher, because you assume Connor Wong's coming back, Danny Jansen would be off. So he's one of two catchers on the 40. But the question, I think, then this is something obviously we're going to be talking about more as the offseason goes on, is there a chance Kyle Teel makes the team out of camp as the backup catcher? Or is it more likely that they go out and sign someone? And that's if they sign someone, Gasper probably, it's hard to say right now.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think you can predict it, because here's the other thing with the other thing with Gasper too that's interesting is he spent most of his time in the minors behind the plate. He didn't catch it all in the majors. He played only second base, not even first. I think he might have played a little bit of first, but he mostly played second, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is one of the benefits he brings is he does it. Sure. He is positionally versatile. Like, he can play those. He can handle. I mean, it's not someone you're going to put there every day, but he can in a pinch, kind of like Connor Wong in that regard.
Exactly,
he can play those other positions. But I mean, kudos to them. That's a great find. Someone who, as Mike said, the Yankees left unprotected in the Rule 5 draft, minor league portion of the Rule 5 draft, which, as we've talked about before, that's usually not a great sign if you're left. But I mean, the Red Sox, to their credit, they've done a great job of finding talent in that. I'm just thinking back, like, wasn't Joe Jakes a minor league Rule 5 pick?
Joe Jakes,
Ryan Miller, who made the majors with the Angels, was a minor league Rule 5 pick by them.
That Yankees pitcher that we were trying to think of the other day that I have forgotten again, that I did get the other day, that through the opener at Worcester.
No, I know. Raynell Espinal.
Yep, that's exactly who it is. So yeah, I mean, the Red Sox, that's just another great example of, the importance of the scouting development, or the scouting / the analysts who identify those players, and then obviously development, going out and getting them.
Yeah.
All right, who's up next?
Well, and I guess just one last point on Gasper. I think whether they keep him on the 40 or not depends on if they believe in the bat too. Like, do they think this is a Rob Ref Snyder find? It's not that level, but like, do they think there's someone there? Ian, I'll punt to you, man. You go next.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has, the guy obviously I'm going to talk about is Kyle Teel, and we're in a position where Teel had I thought he was pretty good in Double-A. I actually was really impressed with what he did when he made that jump to Triple-A. And I know the stat line wasn't great. Like, it was obviously much better in Double-A, the final stat line. But if you looked at the way he handled kind of just the challenge that is Triple-A right now, where you're handling a completely new pitching staff midseason, you're having to adjust to learning how to use the challenge system. Like, that kind of stuff can build up on a catcher. And I thought he handled it really well. I thought the defense, it was a little inconsistent from time to time. He had his good games, he had his bad games, but over the course of the season, over the course of when he got to Triple-A, it got better as the season went on. And I think that's all you can really ask for. Like, you look, he finished the season September 375, 516, 542. Whereas after when he was promoted at the beginning, or from August 13th through the end of the month, so that was a span of 13 games, he was 118, 207, 137. So once he got adjusted to the level, he showed that his bat is more than capable of handling that type of pitching. And if he can show that kind of two-way upside and carry that forward to the majors, the Red Sox have just a weapon on their hands, because as we talked about over and over again, catcher is not good at the major league level right now. And if you have a two-way guy who can, be at least a 50th or better percentile defensively, and then also is adding value at the bat by getting on base and hitting for power. Teal's got a little bit, he's a good athlete, can run a little bit. Like, he's a guy who could easily be a 3+ WAR catcher, and that's just the surplus value he would provide for this team could be immense. So I think that his development and kind of living up to his stock as a first round pick who they got lucky that fell to them and has established himself as a top 25 prospect is just the most important development at the position this year in the system for that position. That is.
Absolutely. By the way, we forgot one more minor league Rule 5 guy, Caleb Hort, which maybe it's for better that we forgot about him.
Oh yeah.
Is what it is. So the catcher, the other catcher that I think is really kind of looking back on this season that's worth mention is, unfortunately, Nathan Hickey, who kind of started the year with a surprise, to me at least, I think, assignment directly to Worcester coming out of camp, which seemed a shade aggressive and just never really got on track at the plate. Just never really put it together, had issues with spin, hits velocity, and he hits the ball really hard, but 22% in zone miss. Chase wasn't too bad, but just performed to a level where he actually wound up having to go down to Portland when Kyle Teal was promoted up to Worcester, and we saw it coming a mile away. Frankly, we called that was going to be the counter move, a month and a half ahead of time, Mike?
Yep.
Really just kind of struggled and continued to have issues with throwing runners out at the plate. Throwing runners out on the bases as well, I believe. Just really kind of on a precipice in terms of his minor league career and his career in general next year. I kind of wonder what you do with Nathan Hickey at this point. Do you try and keep him behind the plate because the bat's not, have you seen that the bat is not enough to carry him at first base or left field, where you think you have to try and make him into a catcher? Or do you move him out from behind the plate, hoping that allows him to focus on the stick, fixing his holes at the plate, and, getting back in the rhythm at the plate and maybe becoming a bat first guy who's maybe sort of a first baseman, maybe can catch a little if you need him to, but not necessarily a guy you're going to play behind the plate all that much. He is kind of at a precipice right now. He fell down our rankings to, where is he now? I mean, he's definitely out of the top 30. I know that much, from being, kind of at the 15-ish range, I think, to start the year. So that was kind of one of the more disappointing developments in the system, and a year that didn't have that many. I'm not sticking a fork in him yet, but definitely an enormous offseason for him and an enormous year for him next year and for the organization and figuring out what they want to do with him. In theory, Teal starts the year in AAA, probably. Does he start again in AA? Does he split with Teal in AAA? That could happen. I don't know. A lot of different ways this can go. You want to talk about a choose your own adventure. There are a lot of pages to flip to on the Nathan Hickey story for next season, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting case because his baseball card numbers are not very good this year. Like, he hit 209, 350, 382, so good OBP. Slugging is brought down by just the low batting average. He didn't hit lefties at all, like 189, 294, 243. So is that what he is? Is he a platoon like first baseman? It's just a really tough profile.
Platoon strong side first baseman. Yeah,
it's just a tough profile. Because to do that, you have to rake. Like, you look at the guys who can hold down that role. It's like Ryan O'Hearn. It's guys who, are putting up, 120 plus WRC plus against righties. So probably more than that, frankly. But they're like, at the same time, his hard hit numbers are still good.
Yeah.
Like, his OPS versus righties is still good. Doesn't chase. Like, under the surface, there's still some good metrics there. So I do wonder if, maybe we're going to look back and this was just
a blip.
Either a blip or just they move him off catcher and it's like, oh, he doesn't have to worry about catching, and now all of a sudden he's hitting again. Like, I do wonder if that is a potential outcome here, is they decide, hey, we still believe in the bat, we're going to move him off catcher and let's see what happens. Because I know, talking to a lot of scouts, there's still scouts who like him, but they all say the same thing: is I want to see him play the field. I don't want to see him at catcher. I want to see what happens when he goes to another position, because they just don't believe in him behind the plate. And I do wonder if that is taking a toll, because being a catcher that's not easy. Like, that takes wear and tear on the body. It takes a lot of your focus and preparation. It has to go into, game planning to be a pitcher, or for the oppositions, and working with the pitchers. So you don't have as much time to focus on the hitting aspect of the game. So I do wonder if that's something that they think about this offseason.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm getting close to the point where I just don't see a path to the majors anymore. I'm not totally there yet, but I'm getting close. Um, I do think that what you were just saying is a good point. Is that the baseball card numbers are not indicative of what of his hit tool. As I think they're better than he's better than what they show. So I still believe in the bat a little bit. And you watch him, and he has a plan when he goes up there. I really like his approach. But something about him, and this is not a great comp, but something about him reminds me of Ryan Lavarnway in that he's a hitter that was like a poor defender, and Ryan Lavarnway would hit 330 and didn't have a path, even though he was putting up better baseball card numbers. And he ended up getting like these little tastes of the majors over like a 10-year period. He would get like 5 games here, 6 games here, 5 games there. I could see like something like that happening, but that's just kind of what I'm seeing right now. It's not a perfect comp, but just something I'm seeing.
For what it's worth, his stolen base numbers on the year: 65 stolen base attempts. No, sorry, 7. That's just AAA. It's 75 stolen base attempts on him, 68 steals, 9% caught stealing rate. In AAA, he had a 11%. He actually didn't throw out any of the 10 guys who tried to steal on him in AA, which is maybe just an aberration of some kind. But 11% caught stealing rate in AAA. Compare that to Gasper had a 14%. Kyle Teal 20%, Tyler Heineman 32%. Kind of defensive catching specialist. So just to put that in context of what we're talking about on the stolen bases.
Yeah, and that's the other question
yeah.
with Gasper is, are we sure he's like, are the Red Sox comfortable as him as like the third catcher? Because as you said, he hasn't caught it all. So
right.
that's something to watch.
All right, let's move on to first base. Ian, I'll give you the first crack at this one because Mike got the first crack at at catcher.
First base is a tough position because there's just not a lot of true prospects at first base.
Oh,
so,
just go where we know you're going.
What? Well, I was going to say, but they do have one guy in the DSL who I think was kind of one of the breakouts this season. That's Justin Gonzalez. He was, I think, an all-star in the DSL. Their best hitter for the season,
mid-season, not like
or
end of
mid-season,
year, but yeah,
right, yeah, sorry. And he was the one who switched teams, right, to the
there were a few guys that did. His was him and Dalvinson Reyes getting moved was the most obvious. We are now loading this team up for the playoffs move. But
yeah.
But
he ended up at 17 years old, he hit 320, 391, 517 with 5 home runs, 20 strikeouts to 19 walks, which you like. He's listed at 6'4", 210. So he's obviously very physical. But when you look at the numbers, like, he's putting up very legit EVs for his age. Like his 90th percentile exit velocity was over 103 miles an hour. His hard hit rate was over 40%. Like, those are numbers that I'll just looking at someone, those are better than what Mikey Romero did this year. Those are better than a lot of prospects, 3, 4, 5 years older than him. And if he's doing that at 17 and the approach metrics, they're not terrible. That's really interesting to me. Obviously, the track record of guys who are that maxed out physically in the DSL is not great. Like, that tends to catch up with them eventually. But there's a lot to like here under the surface. And obviously he was one of the top performers. And if he can, come stateside and show this type of impact potential, it's a very interesting prospect going forward for the Red Sox, because that DSL team that won doesn't look very prospect laden, even though they obviously played really well down the stretch. So he might be one of the guys who come stateside next year to watch out for when we get to spring training.
And for what it's worth, he did get some time in the outfield corners as well. He's a big boy. I don't know if that's going to take, but they're seeing what it looks like.
That's the hard thing is he's a right guy who's 6'4", 210 as a 17-year-old. That's just a really tough. I think back to like some of the guys, like the Phillies had a guy, Jalen Ortiz, who was like that, who got a huge bonus. Like, whereas I think Gonzalez got like $250K, but Ortiz, by the time he got to AA, he was so stiff, he just couldn't make contact, frankly. And knock on wood so far, like Gonzalez's in zone whiff rate's really low. Chase rates tick above average, but not terrible. Like, there's not as much swing as miss as you would think. And as I said, 20 strikeouts, only 19 walks, 20 strikeouts is really good. So definitely a interesting guy to watch going forward. And I think his development or kind of, breaking out at the DSL is someone to watch for next year.
Um, it's fine. I'm not going to do this for the entire episode, I promise. But going with another Double A guy for my first base pick, and that's Blaze Jordan, a guy who he I don't know if we want to call him a third baseman, but to me he's a first baseman. Had a year where he kind of really sort of Double A caught up with him a little bit, I think. Continued to post an extremely high chase rate at 38%, which is one of the highest in the system. Did hit the ball hard, 104.1 90th exit, 90th percentile exit velocity. Hit the ball 95 plus about 35% of the time, which is okay, but really struggled against righties, did most of his damage against left-handed pitching, struggled with spin, didn't do great with velocity, which has been something that's been a bugaboo of his whole time in the system, and really sort of kind of didn't separate himself in a way that to become what, I think a lot of people might have thought he could be. Really needed to start separating himself. A really big offseason for him. Obviously, he had a big offseason this past year with, kind of coming out with his mental health struggles he'd had, having a really good offseason and in terms of getting himself into shape. I think this is going to be another big offseason for him right here, the same way it's a big offseason for Hickey, where, another season where he's going to have to put in the work, come into next year, ready to really take off. He is only in his age 21 year, so he's still quite young. Compare that with, other guys like Alex Benelis is 24. David Hamilton had his MLB kind of breakthrough sort of at age 20 in his age 26 season. So he's got time in that sense. But just, to stay on board, I really want to see him come into next year, ready to cut, 10% off that chase rate, right? Like it's really got to come down. He doesn't miss a lot in the zone. If he doesn't chase, he's going to be a lot more effective a hitter and can really start impacting the ball more. But as we saw with Cedar Rafaela, the amount of impact you can make on the ball doesn't matter if you're swinging the pitches outside the zone. So I really would like to see more improvement from him on that next year. There's still something there potentially, but really going to need to show it early next year to stay on the radar.
But we've also seen that it's easier said than done to make those adjustments to the chase rate. Like
Rafaela
has gone the other way in the majors. And that's the hard thing for Jordan is he has to hit because the defense, he is actually a pretty good defensive first baseman, but there's so much pressure on his bat. And the approach, even like part of the reason I think the in zone whiff is so low for him is because he just doesn't see a lot of pitches. He doesn't have a chance to miss on a lot of in zone pitches because he's just making contact so early in the count. And that's another one of those like approach things. So it's going to be interesting to see what he comes into next season because he was someone or last offseason, you would have thought maybe they have to make a Rule 5 decision on him. Whereas now I don't think
not even a question.
He's not going to get protected. He's not getting protected. And I don't think there's a chance he'll get picked. No. So it's as you said, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him coming into next camp next year.
Michael?
Sure. Just looking through the list of first basemen, it's not a prospect laden position in the system, which is not surprising. I mean, they roll out a lot of non-prospects at first base at some of the levels. But one guy that had kind of a fun year was Brian Gonzalez. Mm-hmm. He 23 years old now, been in the system for a while, since 2018, signed for $500K out of the Dominican, and had an up and down career. Hasn't particularly impressed since he's been in the system, but he spent almost the entire season in Greenville this year and posted a line of 272, 337, 508 with 20 home runs in Greenville. Got a late season promotion to Portland where he got in a couple games. So maybe that's telling that he'll be up in Portland next year. Spent most of his career in corner outfield, and this year primarily moved to first base. So it's nice to see. I don't think that he's a big prospect. I don't have high hopes for him, but he was fun to watch this year. He's got a really nice he's got plus raw power. The hit tool is really questionable. I feel like he chases. It can get like a really long swing. His pitch recognition isn't great. So I mean, I think he's still an org player. But it was a fun season to see him hit 20 home runs. Seems like he's really well liked by his teammates, and just fit in well with that Greenville team.
I got two trivia questions for you on Brian Gonzalez. Okay. One which you might expect, but it's cool. One which you might not expect. He had a 90th percentile exit velocity of 108.7 miles per hour. Do you want to guess how many players in the Red Sox organization had a higher 90th percentile exit velocity?
Well, I know the answer
because you were watching me sort.
No, I've known this. It's 0.
It's 1.
The highest, right? Oh no, is it 1? Oh, I thought it was 0.
It's Devers.
Oh, right.
So if you're talking the minors,
I thought you were talking minors. I wasn't.
Yeah, no, it's just Rafi Devers, and it's like a 1/10 of a mile per hour higher.
Yeah, no,
so
I mean,
he hits the snot out of the ball.
Yeah, it's just such a wild swing, but he's a really fun player to watch. Like when you're down in Greenville, you could tell the fans really liked him. He was one of the crowd favorites. He's, I think, the career home run leader for the Greenville Drive, and
which is wild.
I think it's a couple of years ago, it looked like he might be someone who might struggle to get out of the low minors. Like you look at 2022 between in Salem and the FCL, he had 201, 300, 259. And I think the strides he's made these last couple of years have been pretty impressive. And he's put himself, as Mike said, and onto the radar as at least an org guy now.
Oh, and the other thing I just wanted to mention, his fly ball percentage for players not including the DSL, 4th lowest in the system, behind Diego Valoria, Fraley Encarnacion, and this kind of surprised me, Romy Gonzalez. So if he starts hitting the ball in the air a bit more, that would seem to be a good thing for a guy with as much pop as he has. That really surprised me that the fly ball percentage was that low. But yeah, he's definitely an interesting cat. All right, let's move on to second base. I guess that means I'm starting this one. And I want to make sure I get a positive one. And I'll give an honorable mention shout out to Nick York among second basemen, who really kind of, had he not been traded, probably would have been our comeback player of the year. But yeah, York had a great year for second baseman. Otherwise, it's second. Second might be kind of one of the, not one of the thinner positions. There's one very obvious guy. Just I'm not thinking of him as a second baseman right now. Should we just do like 2 middle infielders? Because here's the thing: is they don't. A lot of the shortstops play second base and back and forth. The only second baseman.
It's where it gets tricky though. Is like Chase Meidroth the second baseman or a third baseman? Like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there are guys who play second and third base who don't play shortstop or don't really play shortstop. So
shoehorn guys in, I guess.
I think just pick a second baseman. I don't know. I think you're overthinking it.
Yeah, probably. I mean, look, the really one really obvious guy here is the minor league player of the year in baseball. In Christian Campbell. I know he played, I think, more short than anything this year, which is kind of crazy to think about, but because he was splitting his time between second base and the outfield early in the year. But then when he was in Portland and Marcelo Meyer got hurt, they started playing him almost exclusively at shortstop. Probably just get a look at what it looked like. And I mean, based on what you were saying, Ian, maybe that's not where his long-term home is, but he didn't look like an absolute butcher there either. I don't know how much more needs to be said that we haven't talked about on the show. One of the bigger breakouts we've seen from a player. I don't want to make the comps that are coming to mind of that kind of a breakout from a guy who was a 4th round pick, not to make it sound like I'm talking about one guy in particular. I'm not. But it's kind of interesting in that there were people in the organization who saw this coming, right? So we heard in camp that this was a guy who would be potentially in our top 5 by the end of the year. He's that and more. Earlier in the year when I was saying it's not a big 4, it's a big 4 now. There are people who think he's the best prospect in the system, from a guy they picked in the 4th round without a whole lot of hype, to come in and remember, it's his first full season. He's in AAA. It's very possible he breaks camp with the major league club last year. That is one of the most impressive rises from a player.
You mean next year, right?
2025. Sorry, not 4. Start 2025.
You said last year, yeah.
Yeah, could start next year in the majors. I can't really remember anything quite like this. I can't remember anything like this for a guy in his first full season. It kind of even outdoes what Roman Anthony did last year in terms of the level of the rise that we've seen here. It's impressive. And it's that kind of thing is what part of what makes what we do fun, that can happen. I'm doing this project where I'm kind of digitizing our old rankings. And I came across one the other day that I sent to you guys that had 4 future major leaguers in the back 20 of the top 60. That kind of thing happens not a lot, but it's awesome when it happens. And it's really kind of one of the headlines of the year across the system. So Christian Campbell at second base is just kind of incredible. Michael, I guess you're next. What do you got for second base?
Yeah, so I'm going to cheat a little bit. This isn't technically a prospect, but I'm going to talk about Vaughn Grissom because he spent most of his season in the minors, whether on rehab or not. Came into the season and there was a lot of hope, perhaps not realistic, that he was going to be the starting second baseman out of the gate and just fall into that and everything would fall into place. That didn't happen. I think partly because those expectations weren't too realistic, and then partly because of injury. But the same thing happened with him in Atlanta, I don't know, a year or two ago, where he was expected to kind of break camp with the Braves and didn't. He had a tough season, a lot because of injury. There's been a lot of articles written. I'm not going to rehash them about it, and you guys have covered it. There are some defensive concerns, but he's been solid for the last month, which has been fun. I was getting to the point a month ago. I think I was talking to my father-in-law, like, oh, what happened to this? The Chris Sale trade is an absolute disaster. And I was like, I'm not ready to go there yet. But at the same time, like Grissom is, I don't know if he is the guaranteed starting second baseman that people say on WEI are saying that he's going to be. But he still has a shot to become a second division starter, I think, or maybe like a part-time second baseman, major league contributor. So I'm kind of excited based on the last month of where he's gone.
Mm-hmm. Everyone's talking about the outfield being crowded. The infield, I think, is becoming a question too, right? We're coming into next year. You've got Story, Grissom, Campbell, and Meyer maybe not that far behind, with Devers still at third. Like, and that's getting kind of crowded too. Yeah, they like Hamilton, and Hamilton's kind of your backup guy. He's a great fit there.
Gonzalez is a guy. I mean,
and Manuel Valdez is still getting run at second right now. Like,
well, but I think this is emblematic of the issue the Red Sox have, is they have a lot of like okay players. They just don't have that many like true star players right now, or even like regulars. And it's about who's going to take that step forward and grab that position, because in an ideal world, you're not rolling out like a platoon there, or you're not playing like Emmanuel Valdez, guys like that. If you weren't trying to compete, those are the type of guys that are, in AAA as depth players. They're not on the major league roster. And that's the question is, who's going to fill out, with Story and Devers probably locked in on the left side, who's going to fill out that other position.
Right.
I think it's going to be its own podcast, probably several own podcasts, but who will be the starting second baseman next year is going to be really fun to watch. And I don't know who it's going to be on opening day.
Ian, second base.
Yeah. Not leaving me much here. So I'm going to cheat and take Yoelis Cespedes, because he played like 7 games at second base and 8 at shortstop this year. So and talking to scouts,
he only played 15 games.
Not a lot of
in the field, at least. I guess he DH'd a lot.
He DH'd a bunch. Yeah, he DH'd a bunch.
And he was hurt.
Yeah. So not a lot of confidence that he can stick at shortstop. So I'm going to put him in here. And it was an up and down year for Cespedes. We've talked about extensively his injury. He kind of started the season slow because of an injury, and then ended the season hurt. Ended up having, I believe he had the surgery, right?
Yeah.
He did end up having surgery.
Yep.
And when he was playing, he showed why. There was a lot of hype coming into the year with him. Like, the bat speed is electric. He dominated the FCL. 319, 400, 615, 5 home runs, 25 games. Like, the performance was there. But it was really interesting because there's just a lot of diverging opinions on him. Like you talk to some scouts who really, and it will, I'm sure in the shortstop position, we'll talk to a similar player. We'll talk about another player like this, but some people liked him, but there were a lot who were just, not thrilled about the defense. There's a ton of bat speed, but I'm not sure, if the approach is there, things like that. And I think with him, it's going to be really fascinating to see what happens next season because I think this could go two ways. Like, I think there's a chance he's a top 5 prospect in the system pretty quickly, or the other way is he might be, back down by 20 by, mid-season because he comes out there, starts getting exposed against secondary pitches. He's not a shortstop. He might not even be a second baseman. Like, there's a lot of variance, I think, with him as a prospect, and it's kind of in the same position we were entering this year, where we knew that there was a lot of talent there, and it was just how was it going to translate on field. And now I think we're kind of hitting the reset button for next year because of this injury. He only went out there and played 25 games, so there's just not a lot that I think you can't take too much away from that. And now it's just about what is he going to be next season? Is he going to be someone who can, shoot up the rankings because he shows he's made strides with his approach, he's made strides with his defense, or are the concerns of being a maxed out physically guy going to kind of crop up more and people are going to be kind of more like lukewarm on him? So I think he's someone who's pretty divisive heading into the offseason. It'll be interesting to see how a lot of the national lists handle him when they produce their Red Sox content, because I'm going to guess they're going to run into similar or questions that we've had when talking to scouts about him.
All right. So shall we move on to, that was second base. We've got shortstop, third, and are we doing one outfielder each or 3? Just the one, right?
Corner and center.
Oh, corner and center. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go shortstop, Michael. I think you're starting this one.
Yeah. So I'm going to go with Nazan Zanatello, who had a tough season by all accounts in Salem. So he is dropped from our 13th ranked prospect to our 30th ranked prospect, hit 156, 279, 279 with a 558 OPS in Salem. The chase numbers are not good. A lot of the peripherals are not good. The in zone contact. The chase numbers are not terrible. It's the swing and miss in the zone, and the approach versus spin and high velo is just is kind of ugly. It was a tough season for him, and it's something that needs almost an overhaul of his mental
100%.
approach or something, to just like start over and start fresh, because you guys have talked about it over and over again on the pod, and it's just coming in with a new attitude next year, or just overhauling something for next year, because it's just not working. He's a different player than he was when he was drafted.
Yeah, and that's what we've heard. It doesn't look as athletic. He's not doing things that people who saw him in the pros last year saw him doing. I don't know what happened there, but it's another guy with a big offseason. I was hoping someone would bring him up, and I was hoping it wasn't going to have to be me being Debbie Downer. So thank you for doing that, Mike.
And I think with Zanatello, it's an interesting test case, because a lot of the guys we've seen take that major step this year are the guys who had like the good underlying stuff, but maybe they needed to optimize their swing path, or they needed to, just consistently hit the ball harder, add bat speed, like Christian Campbell, things like that. Zanatello was kind of the opposite. He had all that raw ability, but the approach was the question. And except he was still, he's obviously been working on all that other stuff still too. And I do wonder if that is something where, he was focusing too much on optimizing things like, focusing on the swing path, bat speed, things like that. When for him, he had that ability already. It was just, you got to learn how to hit the ball, basically. I know it's easier said than done, but I do wonder if that is something, because I know that's something that's been mentioned to me, is that they do wonder if there's been too much of a focus with him on things like bat speed, when he already had that, and it was the other areas of the game, the more mental side, as you said, and the approach stuff that he needed to work on, and it didn't click for him this year.
Ian, you're up with shortstops. Why don't you just roll right into who you've got?
I'm assuming you think I'm going to talk about Franklin Arias, but I'm not, actually. I was going to talk about Mikey Romero.
Oh,
And
I actually I didn't assume that at all.
yes, you did. And I think what Romero, it's an interesting year for him because coming out of the draft, and this is the hard part, is he's obviously been severely limited by various injuries and other things that have kept him kind of just not playing that much. Like since he got drafted in 2022, he played in 19 games in 2022, obviously partial season, his draft year, so that's not out of the ordinary. But last year he played in like 35 games, 33 games, and this year he played, something like 80, maybe a little less. Yeah, just under 80 games. And so he's just not played a lot of baseball. And when he did come out this year, he wasn't the player I was kind of expecting. I kind of thought of him as a hit over power guy with a good approach, kind of makes a ton of contact, will hit the ball hard, but it's more like gap power, things like that. And what he showed was it was more of a, I'm going to grip it and rip it and just hit a bunch of home runs. He showed way more power than I was expecting. He hit something like 16 home runs this year. Yeah, 16 home runs. But the approach was not, it was very aggressive. There was not a lot of, wasn't taking a lot of walks. Like he only took 2 in his entire time in Double-A, and compared to 25 strikeouts. And the EVs and stuff, there's good, but I'm just not sure what he is, because it's a weird profile where he's playing shortstop right now, and he's actually not terrible at shortstop. Like I think he's, a fringy, maybe an average defender at shortstop, which I know they're coming out of the draft. There a lot of people thought he would have to move to second. I think he can like play there in a pinch. It's probably not an everyday guy at shortstop, but at the plate, kind of has to choose, like, are you sacrificing too much contact for power? He really struggled versus lefties, and he just had a tendency to expand the zone that I wasn't expecting. I thought I was expecting kind of like a more polished approach. And I do wonder if that was just, getting reps. Like he hasn't played that much. And that's the type of thing that can take, developing that approach takes time, takes consistent repetitions, takes being on the field every day in and day out. He just hasn't done that consistently until this year at the very end of the season. So I think that's something that can improve for next year. But I do, I'm looking forward to kind of figuring out what he is at the plate next season. Is power gains he showed this year real, but is it coming at a sacrifice of too much contact, or is there kind of a happy medium ground that he can find between the two, where the approach, it gets back to kind of the level you were expecting, and then he still is able to show some impact, more impact, frankly, than I think people kind of expected with him coming out of high school.
It sounds right. I think the other thing with just staying healthy, showing at the end of the year that he could do that was so big after the back injury. So, maybe you have to kind of give him that little bit of a grace period, and now that he's healthy, to kind of work out some of those issues that maybe he might have worked out in the low minors had he been healthy this entire time. So that's a good point on Mikey Romero. I guess I'll go ahead and do Franklin Arias then, I guess. Arias, really another breakout story here, but I don't want to say it came from completely out of nowhere. I know we were all really geeked about Yoenis Cespedes coming into camp, but Arias was on the radar. And while maybe Cespedes caught our eyes in camp, Arias was a guy who the Red Sox signed as a glove first guy who really surprised them with what he could do at the plate. And he continued to just really hit the ball this year in the complex league. I saw him when he was in Salem, where he certainly statistically didn't do as well, whereas in the complex league, he had a 355 average, an OPS over 1,000. In Salem, he had a 257 average, got on base at a 331 clip, which was good, but the slugging wasn't great. So the OPS was just 710. But honestly, for an 18-year-old in Salem, especially, a guy who they signed out of Venezuela to a good bonus, over 500K bonus. Yeah, it was a fine performance in his first taste of Salem. He'll go back to next year to start, and I'm not concerned about him. I think he, showed things that will allow him to really kind of, take the next step there next year, probably mid-year promotion to Greenville if all goes well. A guy who does a lot of things well. He's not a power threat, but, we've got him as a potential above average hit tool. I think that's right. He's arm is fine for short. He could potentially be an above average defender there. Runs fine. But, for things that I've heard from guys, good baseball IQ, guy that really thinks about the game. He's not just a guy that's out there trying to, be toolsy and make plays. He's trying to be smart about the game. Asks good questions, that kind of thing. He's a guy that I'm really interested to see where it goes. I think, him jumping into the Baseball America top 100, I think he's in the very back end. Is he in like the 90s, right? I'm very curious if he's still there to start the year or not, as they kind of evaluate all other guys and systems and maybe rejigger their top 100 a little bit. But he's certainly at the very least on the fringe of it. I want to maybe, while saying this is a very interesting, great, very good prospect. This isn't the like kind of like dripping with tools international guy that got an enormous bonus and could be a 5-tool player either. So, it's a 5'11", listed 170 frame. He might be a little bigger than that, but it's not like he's, one of these guys like when you and Clegg, Ian, were talking about Yasnickson Garcia being about 70 pounds above his listed weight last week. He's probably about that, but it's not a huge frame. It's not, he doesn't have I don't see the potential there that you can see with a ceiling with maybe a Cespedes type if he can fix his issues. With Arias, he does a lot of things really well, and we'll see how the sum of the parts, what that winds up being as he moves forward. But a very interesting year from Franklin Arias at shortstop.
Worth noting that he was
yeah.
the Florida Complex League MVP, All-Star, and I think Baseball America named him the top prospect out of the FCL.
They did, yeah.
Yeah, in past years, that would have been huge to us.
Sure.
But like you said, Chris, it's not the toolsiest guy, so the super high ceiling isn't there, but that would have been something that would have really been at the top of our radar in past years. And it's kind of fun that that's like a sixth, seventh type of prospect in the rankings this year.
Well, it was interesting. Yeah. It was just an interesting season for him because if you talk to the people who saw him in the FCL, they were very high on him. But then you talk to other pro scouts, different pro scouts who saw him in Salem, it was more like lukewarm. Like, I don't know about the impact, things like that. And so, it's an interesting, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with him next season, if he can kind of break out further, or is he, as you said, is it kind of going to fall back to earth next year and, still a solid player, but more, a bucket of 45s, 50s, that type of player.
Yeah, it's not Miguel Blaise, right? Like Miguel Blaise came out of there with, loud tools and potential enormous ceiling. This is a very different type of very good prospect. It's not, it's not saying he's not a good prospect. It's saying he's a different type of prospect. All right, let's go to the outfield corners. I think Ian.
We didn't do third base.
Oh, third base. Sorry.
I think it's also worth mentioning that we just went through shortstops without even saying Marcelo Meyer.
That's a good point. Part of that is probably,
you guys have talked about him ad nauseum. It's probably what it is.
I don't think there's a lot to say about him because it's the health thing. There's not much more to say. We've said everything there is to be about that. It's concerning.
I think there is a little bit of prospect fatigue with him too at this point, especially where there are all these other shiny new toys, right? Like
to a point, but I just think, I just think it's more, there's just not a lot to say. Like, he hasn't played. It's kind of, in a weird way, it's almost like an out of sight, out of mind thing. He hasn't played since like mid-July, mid-June?
July 30th or something?
Yeah, he hasn't played since mid-July. It was a really great season up until that point, but I think it just shows the depth of the system that, there were 3 other guys in the top 20 to talk about there. And without mentioning him.
I mean, guesstimating it, Mike, the percentage of the SoxProspects.com's 20 years of existence and ranking the prospects in the system. This Marcelo Meyer is the number one prospect, probably 65-ish% of the time.
I would have said 50 to 60, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's not even in consideration right now.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry. Third base, Mr. Kundal, you have the floor. I think, or is it me? Is it me?
No, I think it's you. I don't really
catcher
care.
first, second, short. No, it's you, Ian, and I get corner.
Oh, it is me.
Yeah.
Third base is a tricky one because if you look around and they have a bunch of guys we've mentioned are playing third base also, but I'm going to take Chase Mydroth, and the reason is, coming into this season, he was one I was a little torn on. Like, he did some things really well, but I just wasn't sure about the impact potential. And I I thought he had an excellent year. Like you look at last year in Portland, he was 255, 386, 375. And I'm just looking just baseball card stats for now. This year he was 293, 437, 400 against a better caliber competition. And he was largely, I think he played hurt down the stretch because if you look at his splits, after he stopped playing the field, his impactability on offense just cratered. Like
well, we know he
started
was hurt, right? Like
right.
we know he
But
couldn't throw.
right. But I mean, like,
that it was affecting him at the plate.
They said it wasn't. They said it wasn't impacting him at the plate, but if you look at the stats, it definitely was because
sure
he was striking out at an abnormally high rate. I'm trying to find it right now what the numbers were, but he was striking out like a ton by the end of the season. Yeah, so here it is. Once he moved to DH, which was August 18th, he didn't play the field again after that. He was striking out at 23.3% rate. Before that, it was 10.8%.
Well, there you go.
And he just stopped impacting the ball like he had before. And that was the biggest gain for him this year and that was the question was, we know he's a nice little player. He makes a ton of contact. He can play he's okay in the field. Great approach, like walks a ton, doesn't expand. Can you make hitters pay or is he going to get Madrigal when he gets to the plate where pitchers are just like, okay, here's a fastball over the middle. Like you're at worst case, you slap a single. We don't care. And he was showing early in the season that wasn't him. He was hitting doubles in the gaps. He had 30 extra base hits this year, and slugging percentage was well over 400 before this injury or before he started DHing consistently. And that type of player is someone who can carve out a nice role in the major leagues. I'm not sure it's an everyday profile, but it's easy to see him kind of moving on as like a utility player, play second, play short, play third. If someone gets hurt, you have no problem playing him every day. He can hit second if you want an on-base guy. More likely hits probably to the bottom of the order, but he's someone who could be a table setter down there who can run a really high on base because he's not going to chase, puts together quality of at bats. Like the type of player, kind of a throwback player that you probably don't see as much these days, but who can add a lot of value to a team. And that's why, to me, he's definitely a top 10 prospect in what is, a loaded system. Like, frankly, like you look at the position players, and if you have him as top 10, you're pushing out some good, like Mikey Romero's not going to be in there, Fitz isn't in there, Sandlin, guys like that he's established himself in that, above those guys, I think is a testament to the work he put in this season. And I think that it's just overall, even with that struggle the last month, it was a really impressive AAA debut season for him. Even if I found out his challenge numbers, they were not as good as I was expecting. So it was just a small sample size thing. Yeah, it was like he was like 50-50.
How sad were you about that?
Were
you upset?
No, I just thought it was funny because I'd never seen him fail, and then it turns out every time I'm not there, I guess. So maybe I was just the good luck charm for him with challenges.
Clearly it's you. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that he's established himself as someone who definitely has a role to play in the major leagues. The question for me is going to be, is it with the Red Sox or with someone else? Because that's obviously they have a bunch of infielders.
I wanted to ask you that, Ian, is where do we think his role would be with the Red Sox? I mean, he just spent a full year in AAA. I don't think he has that much development left. I mean, he could add some strength to his frame. He is an advanced approach already. And he's a decent fielder. Does he spend another year in AAA? Is that fair to him? Is he trade bait? I'm just curious where he fits with this organization with the glut of infielders they have right now.
I mean, that's a great question. Yeah, it's a really interesting one because I don't think he's Rule 5 eligible this offseason either. Right. So they don't have to make a decision. So he probably does start in AAA next year, and we're going to have to do this again, which is, it's kind of, I had not really actually even made that connection that, yeah, he's probably going to end up playing almost 2 full seasons in AAA, not because of performance or anything, just because like they don't have they have other guys for the roster spot. Like, I think Romy Gonzalez has been one of the finds of the season for the Red Sox. So he's turned into, a really useful utility player. He operates in the role that probably you would expect someone like Mydroth to operate in. And so, right. If you already have Romy Gonzalez, who, went out this year, 271, 311, 427 right now, you're not going to replace that with someone who doesn't need to be out of the 40. So I think he's probably, you're right, he's probably going to head back to AAA next year.
And for whatever it is worth, his power numbers, or I should say his batted ball numbers, did appear to have a modest uptick in the season's last 2 months, which when you factor in that period when he was playing injured, and that might have been sapping. He was making some gains in the thing we wanted him to make gains in, right? So, we'll see how he heals up this offseason and comes in next year. All right, so I guess that's on me to pick a third baseman, and yeah, there's kind of slim pickings left at third base especially after I took Blaze Jordan out of third base, maybe a bit short-sightedly. I mean, because then there really aren't a lot of other true third basemen to discuss because the Red Sox did move guys around a lot this year. Tell me if I'm forgetting someone obvious, Mike, but I think really the only other infielder that there is to talk about as far as third basemen go ish might be Nick Sogard. For a guy who moved around the diamond and played wherever they needed him in AAA, like a lot of guys, frankly, because they had guys like Eddie Alvarez, Jamie Westbrook, Nick Sogard. Mydroth played all over the infield. Guys moved around a lot. Nick Sogard was kind of the king of those guys. And another really good story for a guy who got his major league debut, a guy who's performed in AAA for a couple of years now. Even last year, he had people clamoring for his call up. He spent the whole year there, hit 266, 370 on base, just a 391 slugging. But played all over the diamond. And then this year he, came back to the AAA level, like we were talking about. He actually made it to AAA in 2022, but went back to the AAA level and he hit this year in AAA 283, 390, 446. So just made his numbers even better. 835 OPS. He hit at the top of that AAA lineup all year and got his major league call up and has been okay. Certainly fine for a sort of utility backup type. 269 batting average, 653 OPS. Hasn't looked completely lost at the plate. Is a little bit of a rough start in the K. Percentage is over 30%, which you don't want to see. But in a 74 plate appearance sample that's split among a couple of trips to the majors and maybe a little bit sporadic playing time, I'm not going to judge him too harshly on that. But a nice story for a guy who they acquired in trade. He was in his age 26 season. They acquired him from Tampa in the ill-fated Jeffrey Springs and Chris Mazza for Ronaldo Hernandez and Nick Sogard deal, which that's a weird one to look back on. Nick Sogard's probably the number 2 player in that deal right now. And it's just interesting. Is he that guy that can be that kind of for a long time? Is that sort of bench infielder that's useful that you don't mind throwing in there, a couple 2-3 times a week? Seeing him carve out a major league role was a really cool story for me this year, I think, Mike.
I think he's exciting to have as an emergency up and down guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's almost like a perfect role for him because he can play so many positions, reliable defender, and he's not going to go out there and embarrass you. And just a professional hitter. He's a valuable role. Yeah,
seems like guys in the system like him, like his teammates. So yeah, Nick Sogard, utility player, but throw him in at third base. Mike, I guess I'll pitch to you here on a corner outfield.
I haven't picked my third baseman yet.
Oh, you haven't? Okay, no, then let's.
Yeah, like you said, there was slim pickings, so I'm going to just go briefly. I'm going to just go with Starlin Nunez, who was, I guess, the primary third baseman in the FCL.
Once he came back, yeah,
we heard some good things about him in spring training. He was excellent in the DSL last year, was an all-star at 325, 391, 479 in the DSL in 2023. This year's baseball card stats weren't particularly impressive. Mm-hmm. Power, speed, average, nothing. I don't all that much to write about. He's a smaller guy. He's not making a ton of impact on the ball, but he doesn't swing and miss a lot. He's able to catch up with velo at his age. So there's a little sparkle of excitement there, but just somebody to watch for next year that will probably end up starting the season, be somewhere between FCL and Salem again next year.
It's almost more interesting to talk about with Nunez is that low A infield situation gets completely mucked up by the Zanatello and Antonio Anderson situation. Those are 2 guys that gave big bonuses last year in the draft, and they don't look ready for Greenville. Meanwhile, you've got Franklin Arias and Yoelan Cespedes.
Yep.
And Nunez and guys you may, it's I don't think it's a coincidence that they really didn't draft any infielders that they were going to put at that level. I mean, the only infielder they drafted was D'Angelo Ortiz, right?
Right.
So,
Connor and
he's,
Kaysen, technically.
I guess Kaysen. Yeah, well, that's the other thing too, is we're going to see yeah, we got to talk about Kaysen at some point, I guess. But, um, how is that even going to work, right? And it seems like maybe you just focus on pitching at the beginning of the year and then say we'll get you into hitting, we'll get you to hit more once we've got some room for you in Salem. So, yeah, that's really interesting with what happens with him. I think part of it was getting his season started late as well. We liked what we saw from him in camp, but um, I think he played one game and then didn't play for a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, non-injury related absence. We don't know why, but came back and just seemed to never really get on track. Interesting to kind of wonder what that did to what he would have done this season, but a guy we'll have our eyes on next year. Okay, now everyone has actually said their piece at third base. Let's move on to the corner outfield, and I guess I start corner outfield, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, like so let's. I presume we're going to call Roman Anthony a center fielder. We already did Christian Campbell. Alan Castro was a guy that I had a lot of hopes for coming into the year. He's a guy who's basically spent all year in that sort of teens range for us. And I've always had kind of a hard time getting a feel for him. He was a guy who last year in Greenville, or he spent last year split between Salem and Greenville, a little more time in Salem than Greenville. Good on base numbers, the power in Salem, as it does for a lot of guys, didn't really look all that great. But then in Greenville, the power really took off. This year, it's interesting because his end of year or end of time in Greenville numbers compared to last year, higher on base, higher slugging with a lower batting average, which means he was hitting the ball harder to get to that, just about the same slugging. I guess we'll call it 3 points. We'll call it about the same OPS. Really got hot late in his time there and really just kind of made some adjustments. But then, got up to AA. He is kind of young for the level. It's his age 21 season, so I'm not too worried about it. Really struggled when he got to Portland. This wasn't a Kyle Teal, Roman Anthony situation where he got there and did better. In 117 plate appearances, he hit 180 with a 504 OPS. Struck out at a pretty high rate as well. Struck out at a 25% rate. He's a guy who has had platoon splits. We've talked on this show plenty about how there are some who think that he should give up switch hitting and just focus on hitting on his stronger side. But I'm interested to see what he does this offseason to adjust after struggling a bit at the AA level to end the season and what he looks like coming in. Do they keep him hitting from both sides of the plate? Or do they kind of, scrap the hitting hitting right-handed? The left-handed is the better side, right, Ian, on Castro. So, yeah. There's a lot to like there. It's just, I think he's kind of getting passed by, the guys that really broke out this year, but even like Yostinson Garcia, it seems is ahead of him at this point, I think. I'm interested in him working on things this offseason. I'm sure they'll get him down to Fort Myers to work on some things and what it looks like coming out the other side in 2025. Mike, corner outfield to you, sir, unless someone's got something to say about Castro, I guess.
No, I'm going to go with Nelly Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, our listeners probably know, but 21-year-old, 11th round pick from 2023, spent most of the year in Salem. Ended with 10 games in Greenville at the end of the season. Just a really, really nice athlete in terms of power and speed. Looks the part. The hit tool is what is going to is it going to come around? And it was an up and down year. He was slowish start in April, looked really good in May, and then kind of looked like trash in June and July at the plate, and then was awesome in August and September. So which is the real Nelly Taylor? I mean, I didn't get to see him in person this year, a few games on video. So be curious what you guys think in terms of what you saw in person, but I just like the athleticism there. And it just kind of gives him a exciting ceiling.
Yeah, super
Yeah, I think
athletic, definitely. Was he in Greenville when you were there, Ian? I forget. I think
no.
it was
I
after you
saw
got
him. I
there,
saw
right?
him in spring training.
Yeah.
But no, what I was going to say is because he was who I was going to pick also.
Yeah.
From August 1st to September 8th, so that's in between Salem and then mostly Greenville, 297, 385, 505
Right. Very impressive.
with 11 extra base hits. And 15 walks, 27 strikeouts, not bad because that was something. If you look at his season numbers, like strikeout rate's pretty high, walk rate's good. Strikeout rate when he got to high A was a little high, but 148 WRC plus in Greenville is really encouraging and stuff that I just wasn't expecting. Like he hits the ball really hard. Like his 90th is really good. His hard hit rate's good. He's good, doesn't hit the ball on the ground. He does a nice job elevating the ball, hits a lot of line drives, which is nice. And yeah, there's a lot of good underlying metrics here. So it's just a question of is the hit tool going to get to the point where a level that allows the other tools to play up because he's a really good athlete. And then talking to scouts, that was the big question: is the hit tool is still something there's a lot of questions about. They noticed a lot of trouble versus secondary pitches, especially spin. So gonna have to make adjustments there. But he's a really interesting player and someone I'm definitely going to be having my eyes on next year.
Yeah.
Because he kind of broke out, I think at the end of the season, especially in a way that I don't know if people noticed.
Yeah, he was up and down a little bit in Salem, and I caught him with Salem at the time when he was really starting to heat back up before his promotion, and I liked what I saw. We talked about the athleticism that's there, but I wonder how much of this season was him trying to find, because we knew when he signed he was a bit on the more raw side, trying to find hit mechanics or an approach that worked for him, because with the way he turned it on, I mean, one of the game I saw him in, he was a home run away from the cycle, I believe, which was great. It was great to see him turn on the Jets and leg out a triple. Look, I don't know that I saw him do much in the field in either direction. And like we've talked about, that's something that happens sometimes. But yeah, absolutely hits the ball really hard. That's what they're looking for. And I think has the potential to be a guy who, with more of the hands-on coaching in the offseason and just each year, could potentially continue to get better and realize that potential. I like Nelly Taylor a lot. Ian, do you have a backup? Because Michael took your pick.
I'm actually going to pick someone who didn't play this year. It's Braden Montgomery, and it goes back to a conversation I was having with someone in the game recently, and it was about the Red Sox system, and it was like, as good as everything was this year, what if Luis Perales had stayed healthy? What if Braden Montgomery could actually play? Like, they had a chance to have like 6 guys in the top 50.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just think Braden Montgomery, who's someone who kind of like how we didn't really talk about Marcelo Myers shortstop, I wanted to mention because we haven't talked a lot about him a lot on the podcast because he hasn't played. And this is a guy who, coming into the season was seen as probably a top 5 pick, and he fell to the Red Sox. He got hurt. The draft fell the way it did, kind of like what happened with Kyle Teal. He didn't have a landing spot. He ended up falling to wherever the Red Sox were 12, I think. And the upside here is just immense. We're talking about a switch hitter with a cannon arm with huge raw power. And if he comes back healthy and shows any sort of ability similar to what he did in college, like this is a guy who will be a top 50 prospect by midseason at the latest in the national rankings if he shows anything like he did last season. And I think he just kind of gets slept on because he hasn't played yet. That this is a guy. The Red Sox added a potential high end talent in the draft. And we haven't really got to see the fruits of that because he didn't play, even Peyton Tolley didn't play. Like a lot of their draftees didn't play. So I feel like more so than past years, this applies obviously to him, but also others. We're going to go into next season with a bunch of new guys that we don't have a lot on because the draft, they didn't get to play. So I'm Montgomery, someone people have mentioned to me, just don't forget about him because there's a lot of upside here. And I know the Red Sox really like him. So I'm interested to see. He's one next season, one of the priorities for spring training for sure to kind of see what's going on with him. And then obviously into the season as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost like he's kind of a forgotten guy. Just because, like you said, out of sight, out of mind a bit with him.
He's
right?
like a red shirt in like college football.
That's exactly what he is. He's a red shirt.
Just a five-star. You redshirted your 5-star quarterback, and we'll see what happens next year.
Yeah, he's the guy in camp that it's like, okay, where's Montgomery? As soon as we get feet on the ground there, right? So yeah. All right. So I guess that moves us to center field, which I guess now we are back to Michael. You're up with your first pick.
Sure. I mean, I'm going to take the obvious one, but I think we should share the discussion on this one. But just talk about how fun it is that Roman Anthony is the number one prospect in all of baseball. It's not something that has happened a lot in the history of the site, and it's a well-deserved honor. I mean, he's one of the youngest players they've had in AAA. In my time covering the site, both perform statistically and peripherally, and the scouting data is just phenomenal across the board. So it's just such an exciting player. I can't talk about him as expertly as Ian can, but I have seen him a handful of times in person. Just fun to watch, exciting. I got to bring my son to watch him play in Worcester at the end of the season, and he's excited. So that's just the kind of stuff that like when they say you can't be, it's hard not to be romantic about baseball. It's just kind of an exciting player to watch and to look forward to for next year. I'm just really excited about it.
How many number ones have they had? Because I mean, technically, Dice K was number one on Baseball America's list, which I never really considered a number one.
Benintendi was,
but
right?
Other than that, it's Benintendi. Who
was Moncada ever one?
No,
maybe
he was 2 behind Benintendi the offseason they traded him to Chicago. So if they hadn't traded him, they would have had 1, 2. Because this came up on the forum where it's like, it's not impossible. I don't know that he'll be number 2, but like, if Campbell and Anthony were to both start in the minor leagues next year, or maybe if they both start in the majors and they just stay eligible for long enough, like it wouldn't, I don't know, if there are people in the Red Sox system who think that Campbell's the better prospect, could they get to 1, 2? It's not crazy. I'm not going to predict that it's going to happen, but like it could happen, which is kind of wild to think about. But it'd be almost like a Buxton Sano situation where they had like a 1-6 that year. The Twins did. I could see that, but yeah, it's definitely fun when that happens.
Well, I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier. The kind of the overarching thoughts on the system is they needed this breakout. We obviously were really high on Roman Anthony. We've had him in the number one prospect the entire season, going back to last offseason. But he got even better. He got even better than that. Like he turned himself, I think this year his stock rose even further, as we've seen with the national list. He jumped from someone who was in the 20s and the 30s last offseason to now in consideration for
the 20s and the 30s in August.
Yeah,
it's like the end of the year. Everyone caught up.
The upside is immense there. There's obviously still things he needs to work on. Swing a little more maybe earlier in the count is something he started doing later in the season. I think, he's such a good hitter and his approach is so good, but there are times where he'll be a little passive early on the counts on fastballs, things like that. When you're that type of hitter, you might only get one good pitch to hit and it might be the first pitch. You got to be a little more aggressive. So it's something I definitely will be watching next season to see if he can make that adjustment. But overall, his development is just massive to the system and just puts them in such a good spot heading into next season.
100%. Ian, I think that goes to you.
So my center fielder that I think is worth talking about is Miguel Bleis, because it's just been a weird year for him. And it just kind of continued the trend we've seen where he's not, it's kind of like Meyer, like he's never really been consistently healthy. 2022 lower back issue, 2023 left shoulder subluxation, eventually had surgery. This year, what did he miss time with? It was finger injuries.
He had a finger, he had a root canal. I mean, some of that's fluky. I don't want to ding him for a root canal, right?
But he played almost 100 games. But and like the underlying data is still good. It's just at some point you do have to perform on the field. It's got to translate. And he's still pretty raw. Like, it was 190, 265, 319 in Greenville, 257, 349, 398 in Salem. So obviously you like the Salem better. And he'll show flashes. Like the speed is there, the defense is there, the arm is there. But then he'll have games where it's just not. And I just think he's got to find that consistency and kind of, have that drive that every day you go out there, you want to be the best player on the field. Because on raw talent, he does have that ability, but there's a big difference between, translating that raw talent into actual ability. And he's not at the stage in his career where he can do that yet. So I think this is a really big offseason for him to show that commitment to baseball, to show that, I'm going to go out there in the offseason, work my butt off to get in the best position possible to start next season, because that's a big year for him. He's got to go into next season and translate that raw ability into talent, or he's just going to continue to get passed by other guys in the system.
Well, to be fair though, he was one of the guys in camp last year that we heard that the organization was really happy with what he did. Not even during the offseason, but just starting when he started to rehab the shoulder injury down in Florida. He was one of the guys he absolutely was. Yeah. One of the guys we heard about, that they were really happy with. And he was one of the guys, remember, we kept saying, like, he just looks different. Like he looked really good in terms of his body. And we were really excited about him coming out of camp, and then it just didn't translate. It seemed like he never really got going. He had that one stretch in Salem right before he got promoted where he was really starting to get going. But yeah, kind of a weird year for him. The guy up here, I thought you were gonna enter the password, but I'm gonna actually go ahead and do that then. Yostinson Garcia, a guy who, I can recall seeing him in camp with you guys where he was just kind of this, complex league outfielder who's playing some first base. Why is he doing that? Is he moving down the defensive spectrum off the grid, to seeing him with Salem last year and kind of liking what I saw, but not, to this degree by any stretch, or predicting he'd become a top 20 guy. But he just seemed like a guy to keep an eye on. And then this year really kind of had this 2-level breakout. And as I mentioned, after we heard in camp that he was a guy who really impressed during the offseason program with the work he came in and did, has a different body than he had 2-3 years ago, really is impacting the ball, might be able to play center field. Ian and Chris talked about it on the last episode, his ability to potentially play center. So, he's a lot more than, I know the nickname is fun and extremely clever. I love it. I would like to see the chase rate come down, but, he does have some things he has to prove at the plate. I think AA is where he's going to have to do that, and that's why they got him to that level. I'm okay with him struggling a little bit, but we'll see what he can do at the plate returning to AA next year. I'm excited to see what he does next year. I really like, it's a nice, more typical kind of breakout, but a fun breakout nonetheless. All right. So I think, Mike, did you do a center? You did Rowan Anthony. So
I did, yeah.
I guess that's kind of it for our player wrap up. Any other kind of postscripts on this part of things, guys? Any kind of final hitter thoughts on the season? Anyone we didn't get to that you think deserves a honorable mention, quick shout, maybe not a deep dive or anything like that?
No, I just think that overall it is going to be interesting to see how they handle the glut of center fielders or outfielders, and this includes the major leagues, and then also middle infield. They just have a lot of redundancies at certain positions with guys with a lot of value, and I just don't want it to go down the road we saw with like Bobby Dahlbeck, where it becomes a depreciating asset if you just keep it around and around and around. At some point, you got to make a call and trust your internal evaluations of, hey, this is a guy we want to build around, or this is a guy that we, might not necessarily have as high regards and is probably better used as trade bait. I just would like to see some like clear decisions within the organization about that going forward, because they as Mike pointed out, even with Chase Mydroth, like they just have too many guys in the high minors right now. And I think that needs to be sorted out this offseason.
Yeah. And it's like we talked about before, some of the trades didn't necessarily work out at the deadline, but one thing that they showed was they're willing, this new front office is willing to roll the dice, which makes things fun, should make for a fun off season. So I hope they do roll the dice with a few guys, and they're probably going to miss a little bit, but they might hit. That's makes it fun as compared to some prior front offices when they weren't willing to roll the dice ever. They made the offseason a little boring. So hopefully this is a fun one.
Mm-hmm. For sure. All right. Well, we'll have to wait and see. Plenty to talk about this offseason coming up on the offensive side of the ball. Again, next episode, we're going to talk about our season wrap up for pitching, starters, relievers. We're going to talk about the stories there. All right. I guess, maybe let's close with, we've got a couple of emails about hitters that I think we can read here real quick. Again, if you want to email us, it's podcast@soxprospects.com, because we want to talk about what you all want to hear about. First one, just a quick one that I wanted to shout out just because we put out the call for it and because we just talked about Joe Stingston Garcia. MW emailed us and noted that apparently Chase Mydroth's Worcester teammates call him the force field, which apparently has to do with his ability to draw walks. And he set the single season Worcester / Pawtucket, I presume, walk record this year out there. So yeah, thanks for sending along. So force field Israel. And now I've got that song stuck in my head about, I feel so close to you right now, whatever it is. Our next, and the other email we got that I wanted to hit real quick is from Glenn. And he says, I recognize that he's no longer a top prospect, but the numbers seem to indicate a significant change in approach for Alex Binelas in 2024. He notes in 2022, 3 and 4, his slash lines, and they all wind up at about the same sort of 745 to 766 range. But the thing that you notice is he went from having like a 300-ish on base to a 350 on base, and going from having, the slugging went from 438 to 459 down to 413. And the K rate, he cut his K rate this year by 10%. So he says, you rarely see players substitute contact for power in today's game. What did you see in person? Is this real? Could it change his career trajectory? Is it just an interesting anomaly with no real change in approach? And I guess the other part is his batting average went from 206 to 223 to 252. So he says, thanks, love your work on the pod, Glenn. Ian, and Mike, I'm not sure. I guess, Mike, you weren't in Portland. Ian, how much of Binelas did you see this year? And did you see any kind of change in approach? He was hitting like cleanup for Portland at the end of the year where, part of that was just guys had gone up. But, did you see anything out of him that signaled any kind of change that in approach that might make him a little more successful?
Yeah, he was better this year. I think that he did a better job he wasn't as passive. I thought he was a little more aggressive. He was, kind of hunting pitches early in the count, for good or for bad, because big problem with him is there's just still a ton of swing and miss. And I understand that like the K numbers overall were down, but he still is running like his in zone. He just misses a ton of pitches in the zone, and still a strikeout rate. Like he got up to AAA and it was pretty rough. I think it was only like 13, a couple games, but yeah, I don't know. It's the same issues. He can't really hit velocity. There's, he improved against secondary pitches, did a better job against that. But he's still kind of like a 3 true outcomes guy in the sense that, it's a walk, a strikeout, or like not a home run necessarily, but, like a double or, an extra base hit. He's trying to hit the ball in the air. There's just not a lot of line drives. It's a lot of in the air contact. So I don't think it's anything like long term that is that meaningful in terms of changing his like future projection at the major league level. But it definitely, is something that you'll keep an eye on for next year to see if he can carry over to AAA. Then maybe you'll get a little more interested. It'll become a little more interesting. But I just think that still there's just with his profile, you need the power, and it's nice to make that adjustment, but you got to have the power too if you're going to be like a corner guy who's a platoon bat. So I think that he's going to have to kind of tap into that power next year in order to have a chance to get up to the big leagues.
Yeah. He did significantly cut his end zone whiff rate this year, which is good. But like you said, if you're not,
but it's still not good.
It's still not good, but it went from being like one of the worst in the system to
he definitely made adjustments this year at the plate. Yeah. He definitely shortened up his swing, things like that. But
yeah, I'm not saying that to disagree with your point at all.
With a guy with his profile, though, you need to hit for power, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I don't disagree, especially where he's corner and field only, likely first base only. But yeah, but thanks for the questions again. Podcast at soxprospects.com. We want to talk about what you all want to hear about. And with that, we are going to wrap it up. So thank you all for listening. Thank you. Thank Mike for making an appearance on the show. Thank you, Ian, for just being you. Just thanks for that. We want to shout out our producer, Daniel Fox. You can follow the site on social media at Sox Prospects. You can follow Ian at Ian Cundall. That's IANCUNDALL. Mike is at Mike Andrews SP. The SP is at the end, just to screw with the fact that I'm at SP Chris Hatfield. We're just trying to make it as difficult as possible for you all to follow us on the socials. But you can hit us up there. Shout out to the Ludlow Thieves for All the Money, which is our intro, outro music. And we want to thank all of our supporters at patreon.com/Sox Prospects. This episode, we want to shout out Rivers, John Hershey, Chance Stevenson, Ben Wadman, Brennan Kaizen, Mark DeMellon, Alfred Mamlet, James O'Sullivan, Shane Reagan, and Dakota Randall. Thank you all for your support, and thank you all for listening. We'll be back soon with more of the web's best coverage on the Red Sox organization. Keep your ears to the feed. Thanks for listening, everybody.